Hello everyone, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Today, we'll discover why a frightened pregnant woman is hiding beneath a roadside tunnel, and what secret document she carries that could change Ngo Tue's land battle forever. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next videos. Morning arrived slowly over the mountain, carrying pale light through the repaired glass doors of Ngo Tue's hillside home. The rain from the previous night had weakened, leaving the roof wet and every garden leaf shining beneath gray clouds. Behind the curtain, Cham remained asleep on her handmade bed while the quiet house waited around her. Ngo Tue stood beside the table, studying documents gathered through weeks of custody disputes, land questions, and family betrayal. Hugh's folder rested near the box containing school reports, transfer papers, witness statements, and older boundary records. The sealed record delivered after Lin's testimony carried his mother's signature and mentioned payments from his years in Japan. Lin had also connected her husband to missing files and people who once handled important hillside land documents. The official meeting was approaching, but Ngo Tue still did not know whether those papers would protect or destroy their home. Still, fear could not prepare Cham for school, feed the animals, or finish the work waiting outside. He opened the repaired doors and stepped into cool air, where rain had scattered sand across the damp yard. Using an old shovel, Ngo Tue gathered the sand into a neat pile beside the newly completed bathroom. Then he loaded large stones onto the wheelbarrow and pushed them toward the old vegetable plots below the house. The wheel sank into wet earth, forcing him to lean forward and drive it across the uneven ground. Beside mustard greens and onions, he arranged the stones into strong rectangular borders for several new planting beds. The lines were imperfect, but they would keep fresh soil from washing downhill during future mountain storms. Ngo Tue carried dark soil from the upper garden, removed roots and gravel, then pressed it firmly between the borders. Every movement was practiced and economical, shaped by years of hard labor and the constant need to waste nothing. From inside, Cham called his name, her sleepy voice passing through the open doorway into the yard. She appeared behind the glass with untidy hair, rubbing one eye while watching her father continue working. Ngo Tue smiled and said the vegetables had demanded a better home before breakfast, leaving him no choice. She studied the stone beds and asked whether they would plant onions, mustard greens, or more sweet gourds. Then Cham noticed dark clouds beyond the mountains and asked whether another heavy rain was coming. Ngo Tue felt colder air and changing wind, explaining that mountain weather rarely asked permission before changing. Inside, he warmed leftover rice and cooked one egg with vegetables gathered from their small garden. Cham divided the egg equally before he could give her more, reminding him that partners shared everything. After breakfast, Ngo Tue checked her books, water, pencils, uniform, and the bread packed for her morning break. Before leaving, Cham quietly asked whether her father would return to the school gate on time. Ngo Tue heard the old fear beneath her question, created by too many adults who had disappeared. He crouched beside her and promised he would be waiting after the final bell, regardless of unfinished work. They followed the damp path toward school, while mist moved slowly between trees and distant village rooftops. At the gate, Cham turned once to make certain her father still stood exactly where she had left him. Ngo Tue raised his hand and remained there until she disappeared safely among teachers and other children. On his journey home, the first raindrops darkened the path and tapped softly against broad banana leaves. By the time he reached the hillside, the sky had darkened completely and rain hammered the roof. Ngo Tue stood beneath the eaves, watching unfinished work while water streamed steadily from the repaired roof. His thoughts returned to the coming meeting, Hugh's folder, Lin's testimony, and sealed records waiting inside. He calculated money still needed for seedlings, food, school supplies, repairs, and whatever legal expenses might follow. Near the lower fence, sweet gourds hung ready for harvest, their pale skins visible beneath rain-darkened leaves. If the weather softened, he could sell them, buy dinner for Cham, and return before darkness covered the mountain. When the rain weakened, Ngo Tue returned to the beds and pressed the moist soil firmly into place. He checked the small fish pond, then released several young fry and watched them disappear beneath muddy reflections. Afterward, he carried 2 woven baskets toward the gourd vines growing along the lower edge of their land. The fruits were pale, heavy, and fragrant, showing they had reached the right moment for harvest. He cut only the ripest gourds, wiped away wet soil, and arranged each one carefully inside the baskets. Before leaving, he covered the beds, secured the doors, and looked once toward the school road. The afternoon market remained busy despite uncertain weather, with vendors calling beneath patched roofs and plastic sheets. Ngo Tue found a small space near a vegetable cellar and arranged the gourds in 2 clean rows. The final gourds sold faster than expected, leaving wet leaves and the sharp smell of freshly cut stems. The market had not solved the custody dispute or land investigation, but it had provided food and progress. He bought pork ribs for Cham, choosing pieces with enough meat for soup and bone for sweetness. At another stall, he selected several packets of vegetable seedlings suitable for the new beds beside their house. Ngo Tue left with lighter baskets, cool air against his face, and muddy roads stretching toward home. He carried the ribs in one hand and protected the seedling packets carefully beneath his other arm. Near a concrete drainage tunnel below the road, Ngo Tue noticed a figure crouched deep inside the shadows. At first, he assumed someone had stopped there temporarily to escape the rain and cold wind. Ngo Tue slowed and noticed soaked clothing, bare feet, and 2 arms protecting a visibly swollen belly. When the woman finally lifted her face, recognition came slowly, then struck him with immediate and painful force. It was Lin, the pregnant woman who had once run to his home begging for protection during a storm. She looked thinner now, with wet hair across her face and raw fear filling her exhausted eyes. Ngo Tue placed everything on a dry stone and called Lin's name softly from the tunnel entrance. Lin flinched but did not answer, while water continued dripping from the concrete above her bent shoulders. He stepped closer and asked what happened, why she was alone, and whether anyone had followed her. Lin looked toward the road before speaking, as though every sound belonged to the husband searching for her. She explained that he discovered the temporary shelter arranged by the village women's representative after their previous encounter. He followed her there, accused her of exposing family secrets, and demanded the money saved for childbirth. When Lin refused to return, he threatened her relatives and promised that nobody would protect her again. She escaped during an argument, then avoided the main road because she feared being recognized or followed. Lin had walked for hours beneath the cold rain without food, rest, or any safe destination ahead. Ngo Tue noticed how tightly she held one side of her belly and asked whether she was injured. She denied it too quickly, saying the baby still moved, although painful tightening had begun across her stomach. Ngo Tue removed his outer shirt and offered it, leaving only a thin undershirt against the evening cold. She accepted it, but whispered that returning was a mistake because she always brought trouble to his home. Ngo Tue remembered her husband watching the bathroom, shouting outside the gate, and threatening everyone who helped her. He also remembered Hugh's warning that repeated conflict near Cham could be used during the custody review. Helping Lin again might bring official questions, accusations, or another dangerous confrontation near his vulnerable daughter. But leaving a frightened pregnant woman beneath a drainage tunnel was not a choice he could accept. He told Lin that she had not brought the violence, because responsibility belonged to the person threatening her. When Lin tried standing, her knees weakened, and Ngo Tue caught her before she fell against the wall. Fear crossed her face as she pressed both hands over her belly and struggled to breathe steadily. Ngo Tue asked whether the baby was coming, but Lin said it was still too early. She needed warm food, dry clothes, and somewhere her husband could not easily find or reach her. Ngo Tue looked toward the darkening road and suddenly remembered that Cham's school day had already ended. He had promised to wait at the gate, and every passing minute could reopen her old fear. Ngo Tue helped Lin sit safely, then said he needed to collect Cham and bring trustworthy help. Lin grabbed his sleeve and begged him not to reveal her location or send strangers loudly toward the tunnel. Her husband knew the mountain paths, and she feared he might still be watching somewhere nearby. Evening rain began falling again, and each slippery step reminded him that Cham might be waiting alone. When the school appeared through mist, the yard was nearly empty and most families had already departed. Cham stood beneath the entrance roof, holding her school bag tightly while anxiously searching the empty road. Relief softened her face when she saw Ngo Tue, but she immediately noticed his missing outer shirt. He apologized and explained that something serious had happened on the road, preventing him from arriving earlier. Cham asked whether someone was hurt, and Ngo Tue told her that Lin was hiding nearby again. He explained that Lin was frightened, hungry, exhausted, and desperately trying to protect her unborn baby. Cham recognized the name and asked whether Lin's violent husband had returned to search for her. Ngo Tue admitted he did not know, which was why they needed help from a trustworthy adult. Cham tightened her school bag and said they should not leave Lin alone beneath the road. They visited the village women's representative and explained the situation without revealing Lin's location to anyone outside. The representative gathered warm water, rice cakes, and a blanket, then contacted a trusted family offering shelter. She also informed a local officer that a pregnant woman needed protection and requested a quiet approach. Together, They returned toward the tunnel as early darkness spread across the wet and slippery mountain path. Lin remained where Ngo Tue left her, curled against the wall beneath his damp outer shirt. Cham knelt near the entrance and offered a rice cake while keeping enough distance to avoid frightening her. Cham answered that people did not forget someone who had once been frightened inside their home. Lin began crying from exhaustion, fear, and the sudden relief of finding people who believed her danger. Before leaving, she reached for Ngo Tue's hand and said there was another reason she escaped. Her husband had carried a thick folder containing documents directly connected to the approaching official land meeting. During their argument, several pages fell across the floor, revealing hillside boundaries, witness names, and recorded payments. One page showed the lower boundary described in Hugh's folder near Ngo Tue's newly completed bathroom. Lin had taken one folded sheet before escaping, believing it explained why her husband had become desperate. With trembling fingers, she removed the page from a thin plastic bag hidden beneath her clothing. Ngo Tue recognized his mother's name beside the disputed boundary and a payment date from his years abroad. At the bottom, a handwritten note suggested one witness had been instructed to support a revised land transfer. His breathing changed as the connections between Lin's husband, missing records, payments, and altered boundaries became clearer. The page was incomplete proof, but it could become important evidence during the official meeting the next morning. The representative warned Ngo Tue not to confront anyone and promised the document would be copied and reported. They guided Lin toward the waiting family, while the local officer approached quietly from the lower path. Before leaving, Lin asked whether Ngo Tue regretted helping her after seeing how much trouble followed. He answered that regret belonged to people causing harm, not those refusing to ignore someone in danger. Ngo Tue and Cham retrieved the ribs and seedlings, but hours of rain had completely ruined both purchases. By the time they reached the hillside, night covered the garden and rain darkened the new beds. Ngo Tue placed Lin's page beside them, adding another layer to the story of their disputed land. Cham asked whether Lin and her unborn baby would finally remain safe through the dangerous night. Ngo Tue said they were safer than before, although nobody could promise the danger had completely ended. He prepared simple rice and vegetables because the pork could no longer be trusted after hours outside. Cham ate quietly, then looked from Lin's paper toward the sealed documents already covering the wooden table. She asked whether the rain brought Lin back because she needed them or because the paper needed Ngo Tue. Ngo Tue looked through the glass doors toward the black path and admitted he did not know. Perhaps both reasons arrived together, carrying one frightened woman and one truth nobody expected to surface. Outside, rain struck the roof while cold wind moved through banana leaves and across the garden. Inside, Cham waited for reassurance while one thin document threatened to change the land investigation completely. Tomorrow's meeting was only hours away, and Ngo Tue still did not know where the truth would lead them. Ngo Tue begins the day, rebuilding vegetable beds beside his hillside home while worrying about Cham, the custody dispute, and unresolved land documents. After rain interrupts his work, he harvests sweet gourds and sells them at the market, using the earnings to buy pork ribs and seedlings. On the road home, he discovers Lin, a pregnant woman, hiding inside a drainage tunnel. Lin reveals that her violent husband found her shelter, threatened her family, and demanded money saved for childbirth. Ngo Tue risks arriving late for Cham but refuses to abandon Lin. With Cham and the village women's representative, he arranges protection for her. Before leaving, Lin gives Ngo Tue a stolen document linking her husband, his mother, altered boundaries, payments, and a manipulated witness. As night falls, Ngo Tue realizes the evidence could transform the next morning's land meeting.